Hi there, and welcome to another one of my classic reviews, and in this video I'm going to be talking about Chinese Roulette, which is a film that comes right from the middle of the career of Werner Fassbinder, who is one of the all-time great German directors and one of my absolute favourites. He's a director who was very iconoclastic and controversial, and he was a director who definitely pushed boundaries a lot with his films, and Chinese Roulette comes right in sort of the middle of his career, of his unfortunately short career as well, because he died less than 15 years after he started making films. Throughout Fassbinder's career he sort of went through three phases. He originally started off by making these very experimental, Nouvelle Vague inspired movies. He then went into these socially piercing melodramas that really solidified him as a real force of world cinema, and then he transitioned into more international co-productions, more idiosyncratic oddities, then more variety. And Chinese Roulette kind of comes at that point, the very beginning of that phase of his career, the final phase, where he started making more and more films that weren't necessarily experimental or melodramatic, but they were more unique and stood by themselves in a different kind of way. And he was an author and he had a very distinct vision of the world. In fact, his films are very much about poking holes in society, finding moral gaps, stretching the cracks between people, finding ways that people interact socially that's awkward and weird and wrong, finding ways that society doesn't work. Chinese Roulette in particular is focused on the institution of marriage in many ways and family life, and something that Fassbinder has used often is finding like everyday fascism within family life and finding problems and finding unlove and a lack of love between generations and between people. So in Chinese Roulette, husband and wife are both having affairs, and they both arrange to meet up with the person they're having an affair with, but their daughter sets them up so they end up meeting at the same place. And there's just this awkward thing where they both find out that each of us cheating, and they all try to keep that going. And what happens is you have this awkward setup where the characters are all aware that everyone's lying to each other, and they're all aware that they're all deceitful and they're all not faithful, but they try to keep it going, and it's just kind of weird and it's kind of difficult. And what you really get in this film is a film with no good character. In fact, this is a very intimate film. There's only about 8 or so main characters, and there's really not much going on. It's really just a very, very simple story about a bunch of people who all know that everyone is lying and who all hate each other. In fact, there's so many times where they look at each other and it's quite clear that they have real hatred in their eyes, but you don't know quite what they can do about it. They're all trying to piece together the truth and the intention of other people, even though people are very guarded, they don't reveal much. And it's a film where the characters are all trying to work each other out as much as we are. There's one tiny section where we see a blind man who it turns out isn't blind, but it's that thing of like he's in the same state of everyone else in that he can see everyone, but he's pretending that he can't. He's pretending that he can't see, but in reality he can. And that's it. You know what everyone is, and you know, and you can see them all, but do you actually know them? Everyone's trying to not reveal anything, and so you get this whole sense of unease throughout the film. And it's a film of simmering tension. Dramatic tension, sexual tension, other tension. There's a lot of sexual implications here. The married couple are intimate with almost everyone, whereas the people who aren't married and not intimate with anyone, it's kind of a weird one. In fact, every single character, aside from the youngest and the eldest, have some kind of sexual or intimate relation with somebody else. It's a film with a lot of intimacy going on, and that just makes everything really, really awkward in this world where everyone's a couple. There's a lot of third wheeling, and there's a lot of people who just feel out of place in this scenario. Fassbinder loved to just pierce society and find something really wrong. And there's something in here which is interesting, which is the mother-daughter relationship, which is among perhaps the most dysfunctional ever in cinema. I mean, what the daughter says to the mother in this film is quite possibly one of the worst possible things you could say to anyone ever. It is a really despicable section, and I think that's what makes this film interesting, that there's so much hatred between them, and it's hostility that goes both ways. They're both unhappy with each other, but both are willing to be bold enough to openly say that they hate the other person. And it's that way that society genuinely works, that people hate each other, but they don't say they hate each other. People try to be polite and try to pass it off and try to not openly act like they hate each other, but they really do. And then the question, of course, comes from where does this hatred come from? There's an implication at some point that it's to do with disability, that the child being disabled is the reason the mother hates her, and that's something which is quite a dark idea and something that really manifests in a lot of ways. But there's also other things. So there's also a possibility that the child is being manipulated by a mute woman who, of course, is also disabled. So there's also a lot of ways that this film looks at disability in an interesting way that I think draws parallels on the evil ways society can react to it. I mean, this is an evil and cold film, it's a cruel film, it's a film where everyone is nasty to each other. The titular game is a really intense sequence that is really just long and drawn out and ever increasing in its real harshness. But the harshness that it draws from is the harshness of a world of characters that could be real, and although it's not as naturalistic as Fassbinder's earlier work, as particularly his melodramas, Chinese Roulette plays on a level which is somewhat between the real and the unreal, in that it's obviously our society and our world, but it's a bit too contrived to really be ours. But it's just about believable enough, and that's really what's quite scary about it. It's also worth just mentioning the style here. So it's basically a chamber piece, just takes place in one house, and what we have here is kind of a departure for Fassbinder, because this comes from his later work. We see it actually quite stylish. It's not like his earlier work where the camera was kind of static. Here the camera moves. We see people blocked off all the time by loads of objects. We often see them trapped by reflections and by transparent objects. In fact, I think transparency kind of is a key thing here, in that we can almost always see where everyone is. In fact, the camera often shows us multiple people and will move around people to change our perspective between them and emphasise their positions within the room relative to each other. And yet, at the same time, they are all uneasy, they all don't know where they stand, and it's just a film where everyone is seething with hatred, but no one really wants to bring it out. And I think what's really interesting is this is a film where you're waiting for the people to finally reveal their hate, and when they finally do reveal their hate, it's colder and crueler than you could possibly imagine. It's a really nasty film in that sense, but it's also, I think, a fascinating film. It's a film which is really watchable, it's really intriguing, it's a film that's really cold and really intellectual. It's not a film which is warm or nice, it's a film which is just kind of chilly and just leaves you a little nervous and uncertain of the world. It's twisted and messed up, and I think that's just why I like it so much. I think it's one of Fassbinder's finest films, the one that just constantly just brings new things and is just very, very complex and very, very intricate and very, very worth rewatching and coming back to, and finding more and more details within it and finding more and more twists and mysteries and subtle hints and intellectual ideas. It's not a particularly deep film, I don't particularly think it has answers, but I think it's just Fassbinder's usual poking a stick at society and then just letting it fall apart. It's interesting, and if you're a fan of Fassbinder's films, this is definitely one you should check out. It's definitely a classic in my book. So have you seen Chinese Roulette? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have, please leave me a comment. Give this video a like if you like it, and subscribe if you want to hear more of my reviews. You can follow me on Letterboxd or Twitter to read my reviews, links in the description, and thank you for watching.